What kind of music did you like to listen to, and who do you remember was most popular? What were your favorite songs?
Back in the 1960s?
Yeah.
So, so I was born in 1952, so I turned 13, which is kind of when you start listening to popular music mostly, in 1965. So it was the second half of the 1960s. And back then, so Bob Dylan, was big, Peter, Paul, and Mary, like that. And then later, the Beatles became big, and the Rolling Stones, and the Doors, Joni Mitchell, sort of Joan Baez. So early it was kind of more folk music,
Yeah.
and then became more kind of rock and roll.
So what protests were you part of, and what were you fighting for? Where did you go? When?
So at that time, in the second half of the 1960s, the big protests were against the Vietnam War. So the Vietnam War started to accelerate under Lyndon Johnson, and they still had the draft then. So a lot of young men, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, who were being killed. A lot of people were killed in the Vietnam War, and they were forced to be in the army, even if they didn't want to be because of the draft. So it was, so people were protesting the Vietnam War. They felt it was an unfair war, and that so many people were being killed.
And in what ways was music a symbol for that movement?
Well, back then, I mean, there wasn't the internet, right? Nobody had computers, so the only way to get information was through essentially the mainstream media. Things like newspapers and network TV, magazines. I mean, there was no sort of real peer-to-peer network.
Yeah.
And so the Okay, I'm going to start again.
Yeah.
So there was no real peer-to-peer network, and so music was one of the ways that people communicated with each other. So, when somebody sang a protest song, whether it was Bob Dylan singing, "Blowing in the Wind," or any of the songs that came out back then, it was a way of actually, young people communicating with each other, talking about what was important to us. So we talked about the songs and what did they mean, and it was almost a kind of a rallying cry, right?